Hey Jammers, so today I want to talk about Ashes of Creation. Back on the 28th of May, they had their monthly, 2-hour live stream where they talk about all the changes that they've been making over the past month, including the big Siege gameplay, which they had on their alpha servers back the week prior. It was middle May that they started to do that, where they had a siege of upwards of 300 players, which is something that, quite frankly, a lot of people didn't think that they would be able to pull off, but it seems that they can. There's a lot of other stuff as well that we're going to dive into. Basically, I'm going to be breaking down that 2-hour video so that you get the bullet points. And of course, if you do want to go ahead and check out the full video, I will leave a link to that below down in the description. So that way you can watch the full 2-hour video if you wish. But this is pretty much just going to be bullet points and my rough thoughts and ideas about what is going on currently in the state of Ashes of Creation. So the first thing they discussed was the team and how they plan on growing it. So the team is planning on expanding. I don't actually know how big their team is currently, but for a while they were pretty small. Recently, they've hired on 3 new producers, a new engineer, an HR rep, and they're still looking to hire. Obviously, the pandemic kind of threw some wrenches in their plans, and they haven't actually been in the office for close to a year now. They are looking to move into their new office, which I believe is going to be located in San Diego. They're getting their server rooms, built up. They're getting their offices built up, and they are going to be returning hopefully in mid-June, Steven was saying. They don't have a hard date, but that's when they're looking to do it. Obviously, this is going to be a big boost to the overall team's morale and productivity. Steven did also say that they're going to be doing some big batch hiring coming here in the future, including going to job fairs. So they're not done expanding, which is a good sign. You don't want to see a ship slowing down. So the fact that they're ramping up, starting to bring on a lot of new players is a definite good sign for the game. Counterpoint to that, which people thought was going to be a bad point to the game, was the fact that their lead game designer, Jeffrey Bard, did announce that he was leaving Intrepid Games back a couple weeks ago. And people were wondering, is this a bad sign for the game? Normally, when your lead game developer leaves, that doesn't really spell good things. Normally, you would think that that's a person who is going to stay on for the full project. But fortunately, no, it has nothing to do with that. Jeffrey had a big passion in virtual reality, and he had an opportunity with another company to pursue that passion of his. And so they had a mutual parting. He had been with the company for 5 years, and Steven said he was an absolute great guy, super hard worker, huge asset to the team. And what he left behind, they're gonna find someone to pick up the reins where he left off, but it in no way was a leaving that left a bad taste in their mouth. It was completely mutual, and it was simply because he had an opportunity that he just couldn't pass up. Sometimes that happens in life. You got a project that you spend a lot of time on, and something that you've just been waiting for your whole life comes. So good luck to him. Hopefully, his passion pans out and he can do some real good in the virtual reality world. So they then moved into the meat of their live stream, which was talking about the Siege gameplay. And one thing that they did want to point out before actually showing the content is that they are fully aware that there are bugs in this game. So in the gameplay, you're going to see there's a control point notification that keeps popping up on screen. I mean, that is eventually going to be a feature of the game when an attacking enemy is trying to capture a control point. But it was a bug in terms of this where it keeps appearing over and over again. And they said straight up, this is an alpha. This is not supposed to be finished gameplay. I know there's, this trend of games coming out in beta or early release, but it's still a done game. This is 100% an alpha. So this is not supposed to be a polished product. This is not supposed to be a product that is rid of all its bugs. There are going to be tons of bugs. He said that they're working on 1,000 or 2,000 bug tickets right now. They're fully aware that there are bugs, and they hope that people don't judge the game based on that, because the alphas that they're putting out right now are just intended to be more for the macro systems, figuring out if the siege as a whole works versus all the details. There's plenty of time to work out the details, but first they have to work on the overall aspect of what is actually happening before they can fine tune the little things, right? You don't go and build a house by first installing the sink faucets and the doorknobs, right? You got to build the foundation first. And that's basically what he's doing. And that's one of the reasons why they were a little bit hesitant in releasing the verbal NDA, which they did end up releasing. People can and have been talking about their alpha experience, which is, in my opinion, a good thing. First impressions of a video game are very important. I think Steven and his team knows that firsthand. They definitely want the first impression of this game to be a good one, and they don't want it to be players seeing this game full of bugs and not complete and thinking, oh, I'm never going to play that game. But, the fact is that up until this point, the team has been very transparent in their entire design process. And I think most players who are following this game, at least, in the aspect of watching videos like these or just watching their original live stream, they know that it's an alpha and that it's not a finished product. So I don't think that there's that much to worry about. I think he's more worried about the players who don't actively follow the game, who just might come across an alpha gameplay and look at it and think, wow, that looks really good. So it must be pretty close to being done, but there's so many bugs in it. Well, that's not actually the case. So I think that's what he was trying to avoid. But in any case, he did release the verbal NDA, which is super good. So, of course, we did have the Siege gameplay itself. Now, Steven did mention that earlier on in the weekend, they did have a Siege of up to 300 players, but he didn't actually get to record that one. So the one that we're seeing now is about 100 players, which is still not a bad achievement. 100 players at the same time on the same server. That's really good. Now, one of the biggest takeaways I had across this entire Siege gameplay was the actual impact of how the gameplay felt. This is one thing that I found as I was writing and, writing my notes down and trying to figure out what exactly I thought by this. It was really hard to pin down exactly what it was that was giving me this different feeling. Basically, what it felt like was you were actually on a battlefield as opposed to just being a character in the battlefield. It's really hard to explain, but in other MMOs, a lot of times, when you're viewing your character, you're just like top down. So you kind of feel like you're not a part of the action sometimes. The sound design was super important in this. So there's a lot of like clanging of armor, swords hitting shields, armor walking around sounds. There's a lot of like ambient screams of, people getting killed or, people falling or stuff like that. They made it feel like you are a part of the action as opposed to controlling someone who is a part of the action. I think that's really important. It's a different feeling than I think we've gotten a lot in the past from other MMOs specifically. So hopefully they can, even flesh that out even more, because I think that that's going to be a real driving factor into the success of this game, is making you feel like you're a part of it as opposed to you're just in it, if that makes sense. In terms of actual gameplay, we did get to see some of the ballista up on the walls. It looks really smooth. It did say that there was going to be, you had to lead your shots, so there's going to be that. I don't actually know if there's any drop-off to the shots. I would assume so, if they're building it so that you need to lead your shots as well. I would assume that both horizontal and vertical drop would be a thing. If you're doing one, why not do the other? We also saw some trebuchet action. We didn't really get to see it attacking the castle, but we got to see players attacking it. And, it went down pretty quick just from auto attacks. It looks to be like auto attacks is the way of taking down trebuchets and gates and stuff, and it's not so much using skills. But again, that's something that they're going to be fine-tuning along the way, so I'm not too worried about trebuchets being too easy to take down. Then, of course, there was the big skirmish where I believe all the characters in the siege were fighting at the same time, and they kind of just like came at each other like two different walls. And that was one of the big moments where I really felt like you were in the battle. But one thing that I didn't even like think of until Steven mentioned it after the fact was the fact that there was no lag, no glitching, no buffering. And there's up to like 100 people on this battlefield. And he mentioned he was playing this on a 1080 Ti while recording in 4K on an ultra wide monitor. That's not exactly like easy to push, especially like the 1080 Ti is still a solid card, don't get me wrong, but when you look at this game, it's not like a low poly game. It's a game that actually looks really good. So the fact that you have all these players playing on the same server at the same time with particle effects going on, I'm surprised it ran as smooth as it did. Now, I don't know a lot about like server construction and if like a test server is any different than a public server, if that has any play to this at all. But I was surprised, honestly, how smooth it was. So I think a lot of people who were concerned about the playability of these sieges with these high player counts, I really don't think you have to worry. If it's this smooth in alpha, I would be very surprised if it goes downhill once we get to beta and then finally a full release. The combat also seemed to be very smooth, especially, when comboing different abilities and attacks together. It didn't feel like other games that I've played where it's like you attack and then you kind of pause for, half a second before you can attack again. It doesn't truly feel like a combo. It feels just more like a series of skills This definitely looked like it was intended to be more a combo where attacks build on each other as opposed to being separate attacks. But that being said, one of the things that Steven addressed that they are currently working towards is the way that movement is paired with combat. So the way it currently works in their system is that there's like a rooted combat mechanic. So basically what happens is there's kind of two different ways you can look at it. The way they used to have it was a split body system. So basically the top half of your body could continue doing attacks while the bottom half was doing the movement. So you can move around while attacking. But players in the very early testing stages were concerned that it felt a little bit too floaty. So instead what they did is scrap that idea and went with this more rooted system, which basically means that when you use an attack, you move forward a little bit, but for the most part, you're stuck with where you are. And that also doesn't make combat super dynamic. It kind of locks it down and slows it down. And they're not exactly happy with where that is now. So they are looking to adjust that. You know, they want to make it feel that combat is weighted down and your attacks have an impact. A lot of times in single player games, what you'll see them do is something called frame impacting, where basically right when you hit an enemy or a rock or something, they basically duplicate frames. So it basically simulates the idea that you're hitting something and makes your attacks feel heavier than they are. But you obviously can't do that in an MMO setting because then everyone's going to be on different frame counts. And after the animation, you're going to have people just jumping a couple frames around. So they have to find a different way to make their attacks feel impactful. So that is something that they're actively working on. And the last important thing that they talked about during the sieges was a question that Steven was answering from the chat, which was, are you going to be able to repair ballistas and gates? Now, I don't think that the actual mechanics of that are the important part. What he wanted to address was the fact that, first of all, yes, they are, but also the fact of they want to make sure that the individual is just as important as the team. Now, obviously, in a siege, this is going to be a very team-based gameplay, but he wants to make it feel, you know, there are some players who don't play with comms. They don't play with guilds. They don't play in teams in general. So he wants to make it feel like the individual can make a difference just as the team could. So while there is a team of 20 players charging out of the gate to make sure no one comes in, the individual can go around and fix gates, fix ballistas, and feel like they have an impact on the overall end goal of the siege and not just feel like an addition to the group that doesn't really fit in because they're not really communicating with the group, but they still have something to do and their impact does have weight. So that'll be interesting to see what other mechanics they have to include of that similar vein beyond just fixing things, because I think that might get old. But, you know, I'm sure things like taking part in being on a ballista, being part of these defense mechanics, I'm sure that these are going to be what he's talking about, and then further extensions of these are going to be added as, you know, development goes on. They did, of course, talk about some design stuff, some behind-the-scene system fixes, but for the most part, I don't think many players are actively going to care about this section, simply because it's going to affect such a small portion of players. It's mainly going to affect people who are in alphas, so, you know, they're doing things like there's a AI thing that kept like copying itself, and it would make the servers laggy after, you know, an hour, however much time, because basically it wasn't deleting itself after it duplicated. So things like that they discuss, but for the most part, not super important to the majority of the player base. And then the last thing I want to talk about was, of course, the concept art and all the model renderings they showed of both locations and characters. In terms of the characters, they're looking great. The one concern I have, though, is the hair. Not because it looks bad, because it actually looks very good. You can actually like see individual strands of hair. It actually looks ridiculously good. My concern is how are systems actively going to run this? Because like, so back when I played The Witcher had NVIDIA Hairworks, right? And you could toggle that on and off. And as soon as you toggled it on, wow, did your frames drop. So if you're having these battles with hundreds of players and they all have hair that looks like this, how is that going to affect gameplay? And especially, how is that going to affect your systems? You know, their recommended system is looking to be on a 970, which is several generations old and not the most powerful card. So they're either going to have it toggleable, like the hair as just like another detail feature that you can toggle on and off, or they have some tricks up their sleeve to make it not use a bunch of system resources. I don't know how they're going to do it, but I'm curious to see. It could just be for rendering that they have these concepts here. That might not make it into the end game, but we'll see. Right now, the characters look really good, and the concept art for locations, and of course the renderings of, you know, all the different models. Like there's a chest, there's a crown, stuff like that. These all look fantastic, and they look like a world that I want to be a part of. The thing that really makes me excited, though, is when I look at this concept art. The thing that this reminds me of, if you guys have seen the Lord of the Rings extended versions, on those discs, there's a lot of like behind the scenes features, and you can go in and see like the concept art that they were working on before they actually started filming, or even, you know, designing anything for the movies. And what you can see in those videos is that a lot of lore went into the design of those products. Like if you look at the Rohirrim from Rohan, there are so many horses built into their weapons, into their armor, into their houses. Like the horse design is everywhere because Rohan like built itself on the horse. They all but worship the horse, really. And I get the same vibes from this game. Now, does all that stuff really mean like a better game? No, it's design element. It's stuff that most players will never take notice of. But what I am hopeful for is that this team that's working on Ashes of Creation is as passionate about the game as Peter Jackson, his team, was about Lord of the Rings, because they put so much detail into that, and the quality of those movies, wow. For 20-year-old movies, they really stand up. But if Ashes of Creation team can put that much passion in, and like if they're really caring about the small details, it makes me think that overall the macro details are going to be just as good, if not better, because that's the stuff that players will really take notice of. And it helps me believe them even more, you know, when they say that all the stuff about wanting to return to how MMOs were, and they're really passionate and they want to just bring the best player experience they can. It helps you believe them a little bit more when you see the passion that they're putting behind it. And it's not just another corporate money-making machine that's pumping out a new game. It's people who love the genre, love the game that they're working on, and want it to be the best experience for their players. So just the fact that like that's the vibe I get. I may be completely off on that. They may just thought that the designs look cool, but that's at least the feeling I get when looking at these designs. So hopefully I'm right about that. I would assume so. The passion that I get from Steven and all the past streams that they've done seems to be off the charts. You know, all the interviews he's done, he seems to be very passionate about the MMO genre. So I would hope that he's, you know, expressing that passion and pushing it on to his team, and hopefully they have the passion as well and can just really crank out a game, because, you know, I know the game is being overhyped at this point. You know, I'm not one of these people who's going to say it's the best game that's ever going to come out, because if you overhype a game, it's never going to reach those expectations. But hopefully it is a very good game. I have very high hopes. The stream was really good. You know, the Siege gameplay looked really good. They obviously covered things in way more detail than I ever could here in their 2-hour stream. So definitely stay tuned. I will be putting out more updates as more Ashes of Creation content comes out. And if you did like this video, please remember to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and hit the notification bell. That way you never miss a video. Also, remember to join our Discord. We are primarily Final Fantasy XIV based, but we are a place for all gamers alike. Thanks so much for watching. Let's jam again sometime. Hit it.